So good afternoon again to everyone. My name is Maria Barnes, and I am the president of the Access User Group Lunchtime chapter. I am going to be your presenter today, and we'll be talking about importing and exporting from Access. So a couple of details before we get started. First of all, we are, if you've joined us in past months, we are still on Skype this month, but I do believe that we are going to be moving to Teams meetings for next month. So you will get, if that is the case, you will get more updated information as far as the meeting invite, and you will see a difference there as well. I believe that you are all muted at this point, but if you do have something to say, feel free to post a chat in the conversation or unmute yourself. You should be able to unmute yourself, I believe, to ask a specific question during the presentation, but then go ahead and mute yourself back after you're done talking so we don't get a lot of external noise. I also wanted to bring up here our calendar for the next couple of sessions. The next two sessions are actually going to be both guest speakers. In April, we are going to have the linked table manager add-in that Dale here has developed, and it's something, an add-in tool that you can use even with older versions of Access. You may have seen a webinar from Access Lunchtime earlier in the year that talked all about the brand new linked table manager, which is only available in I believe Office 365. It's not even 2019. So this is something that you could use if you are on older versions of Access, and has similar, and as I understand it, even more complicated or advanced techniques rather than what the new linked table manager does. And then in May, we're going to have a session on understanding the Access reporting engine, and that will be for advanced users. And this is going to be given by Jim Detman, and I hope I pronounced that right. Jim's actually online here. So in our last Q&A session, several people talked about wanting more information about reporting and events and different things, and so we are going to go ahead and be able to learn more about that rather than just the little bit that we covered in the Q&A. So back to today. I am going to cover importing and exporting within Access and to and from Access. And the version I'm going to be demoing today is in Office 365, the Insiders version. Most of the more up-to-date versions, 2016 and 2019, are very similar to this interface. If you happen to be working in something older than that, then your interface may look different than what I'm going to show you today. But there are a few things, some new types of linking that is involved, new data sources with the later versions, but most of the interface has remained pretty stable. And I would say probably the biggest difference would be in the new linked table manager, which you will see as part of this. So as far as, and I will make this deck, which is just kind of a note and making sure that we've covered all the bases, and then there's a couple links that I'll give you on the last slide. But I will make this available to you via the blog post afterwards, so don't feel like you have to copy everything, directly from this. So for the importing and exporting, you want to go to the External Data tab. Usually you're on the Home tab. The External Data tab of the Office ribbon is where all the different options are. We'll start first here with import and link. There's 3 sections to that. The first is new data source, then there's saved imports, and then finally the link table manager. And I'm not going to cover much about the link table manager today because I already covered that in a different session. But when you are importing from a new data source, like a file from Excel, for example, you have the option to import into a new table, append a copy of records to an existing table, or to link to the data source by creating a link table. So there's 3 different options you have for each of the new data source types. There may not be all 3 available for all of them, but for the most part, most of them have all 3 options. But when you are in the linked table manager, you are only talking about linking data. And so when you go into this add button, the data source types that you have and the linking capabilities that you have are a reduced set of the whole import set, because those that you are not allowed to link to are not part of the link table manager interface. So I hope that makes sense. I did list on here, why can I not see anything? There we go. On the link table manager, when you select add, these are the different types that you get. And the custom option is something just a little bit different. Again, I'm not going to go into details, but you can get multiple types of data sources that you link to under that. So to go into the new data source option just a little bit more thoroughly, again, we talked about the fact that you can import a new table, make a brand new table in Access. You can append to an existing table, or you can create a link, a new link to an outside data source from the new data source tab. And there are different options you can choose here. Let me do that. And they're broken down into 4 different sections: the from file, the from database, the from online services, and the from other sources. And on the PowerPoint here, I've listed for each of those what the different types are that you can link to. So I want to talk a little bit about each of them and how they are different. I would say, first of all, that by far the most common that we get, most common import that people do is to import from Excel. And most of the other interfaces look pretty similar to this, so I'm just going to go ahead and demo, how to do this from Excel, at least completely through as a starter, and then talk about some of the gotchas and what might be typical for you. So in this case, I'm going to choose to import the data source into a new table. The interface is going to be the same if you do an append, except for the fact that if you do an append, you select which table you already want to append to, so that there's that additional step. And then same with creating a link table, that both the link table and the import into a new table, you will name the table. And so you could type into the file name here what you want, or you could browse to where you want to go here. So I'm going to use, for example, this sales by flavor spreadsheet, And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then, whoops, the first row contains some data that can't be used for valid access field names, sorry. And then it tells you that the wizard will automatically assign field names. And, you know, this is nothing to get alarmed at. However, this does mean that you need to look at the results or the mapping that we're going to see here in a minute just a little bit closer if you get this warning. If you have a nice Excel spreadsheet that has the columns on the first row, column headings on the first row, and that they're named something that Access likes, then you will not get that warning. But that's one of the most common warnings. And then the next interface of the wizard here has by default checked if Access thinks that Excel or wherever you're importing from has headings, and it is fairly smart about that. If it sees, for example, data in the first row, then it won't have that checked by default. So you may have to check that, you know, if your column names are named such that it doesn't smartly say that. But you can, you know, uncheck it like this, which would mean that this flavors first quarter would be your first row that would come into your access table. And here you get this warning again, you know, and obviously you got that when we first did this because it checked that for you. And then you can see with the slider bar here what all the headings that it found are. You know, if you can look, and you can actually see here there's something that maybe is a little odd, and we're going to be able to see more about that in the next screen. And then, so if that looks basically good, then you hit the next button. If that looks very messed up, and you know, maybe you see a bunch of blank rows or something, then you would not hit the next, and you would cancel out at this point, and then you would probably open your Excel spreadsheet and take a look. You know, you might have to manipulate it or something before you're done. And then you get a third screen, and that actually allows you to go to each, click on each individual column if you want, and change things like the data type that's coming in. And I will warn you that a couple things to look out for. Typically, the data type is taken from the first couple rows of an Excel workbook, and it reads ahead a little bit, but it doesn't read, you know, your whole worksheet to analyze the data type. So I have had instances, for instance, one of my clients is in the medical industry, and they have claim numbers, and some of the claim numbers happen to be numeric, and some of them have alphabetical characters in there. And if you happen to have the first 5 rows that are strictly numeric, and then you have some letters in your lower columns, then you might see, you know, a data type of double, for example, come in, and really you need to change that to, you know, a short text field or something. Likewise, you know, maybe you don't want these to be doubles. Maybe you want them to be integers or whatever. So you can change the data type. You can change whether or not it's indexed or not. You can opt to not import it by checking the checkbox. And in fact, I would advise anytime that you get that warning message about the field name for you to double check, because look here at this one, field 9. That doesn't have data in it. I don't want to import that. In fact, it doesn't look like there's any data in these last 3. So maybe I want to say, nope, I don't want to import any of these. You can do that. And you can change names. You know, say that you wanted to, instead of having first quarter, you wanted to have first quarter, like that. You know, you could change the field names, because remember, you're creating a new table in this interface, to whatever you want, something that's a little more friendly for yourself here. And then you hit next. And then the fourth screen is about primary keys. And I would highly recommend that you use some type of primary key for any table that you import. And the reason why is that if you don't have a, well, there's a couple reasons why. One is that if you do not have a primary key, then your table will not be updatable, at least in many cases. And secondly is, if you don't have a primary key, if you are linking to the to this from another table, then you may have some issues with that. So it's a good idea to have a primary key. You can either let Access add one, and if you do, it will add an auto number field and auto number them, or you can choose your own primary key, but it does have to be distinct. So in this case, it's defaulted to the first column, but you could choose a different column if you wanted. Or you do have the option of setting no primary key. And then when you're done, it allows you to import to a table. I don't know if I have that. Of course, I can't do that already or not. It defaults to what the worksheet name is. You also have the option of checking this box, which is to allow the table to be analyzed afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this to a table name that I like and finish. And then finally, you have the option to save your import steps. And if you save your import steps, then they will appear or show in this saved imports. So what I did right now is import it into a new table. So typically, if you are going to do something that you repeat month after month, say, and you know, maybe you get sales by flavor for the month, or whatever it is you're doing, you might have a table in Access that you want to store that has sales by flavor for all the months, or something like that. So you know, you might want to continually each month append new data into it. Now, if that's the case, your import should have the month number or the date or something like that in it. But it's pretty typical, as opposed to saving your import steps on adding a new table, to not check that on adding a new table. And then let's go ahead and take a look at our data that we just imported. And here, I've done this before. That's another time where I left that name. Today I just did it here. Okay, so this is the data that came in. And if you look at that in design mode, you should see that this is a primary key, and that, you know, each of these are numbers, and I left them, I believe, at double. I don't think I changed. Oh, I did change this one to integer, so see how that one's an integer. And then it's fairly typical then for people to, if they're going to do something reoccurring, to do it once into a particular table to create the table. Then when you want to save what you're going to do each month, do the same thing, and you have to remember what your steps are. Choose the table that you've already created. You get the same kind of thing, the same interface here. And so a little bit about this, you notice we didn't get some of the same options. We're importing to a table that's already set up. So you don't get a chance to set up the new key, the primary key. You don't get a chance to change the names or anything like that in here. Oops, look at this. Field first quarter doesn't exist in the destination table, sales by flavor. So Excel is not, or this interface is not smart enough to say first quarter without a space is the same as first quarter with a space. So if you're going to do this kind of thing, you shouldn't change the names in your resulting table. You should leave those alone to be, you know, what they are before. I've also seen very strange messages that don't make any sense, and I just it's unfortunate that sometimes they don't make sense at all, and they might just say an error occurred, or I've seen weird error numbers. If you get those and you can't figure out what is going on, then I encourage you to go back to your data source to open it directly. For instance, we go in here and open the spreadsheet. And take a look. You know, what do you have? Do you have empty columns up above? Do you have, in particular, column names with very strange characters? Simplify them. Take out the odd characters. Those kinds of techniques help a lot. Or, you know, maybe if it's something important and large, you know, take out some of the columns and try, you know, a simpler set until you figure out what is your blocker on it. So I'm going to go ahead and try this one more time here. Cancel because we had a problem. Now I'm going to append it into this other table, which I think that I did not change that information. Wait a minute. What did I do here? Did I forget to choose an append? I thought I did. Okay, so I think in this case, when I did it, I had not included the last few here. So let's just go ahead and delete those, and I'm actually going to delete the total. I'm going to rename this. Let's try it one more time here. Notice you can back up so far, but not all the way. So, you know, there's some things about this that aren't that. It doesn't matter in which order you select the append versus import or link versus the file name on this, as long as you don't go on to the next screen without it. Whoops, I didn't want business context. Love it when you're trying to demo something and you're hitting the wrong thing. Append to flavors. Sales by flavor. There we go. Well, now field F6 doesn't exist because I forgot to take that off. Anyway, you get the inference here. I hope. I don't want to waste too much time here in the presentation by doing that. Anyway, so then it's more common to save the append query, and then you would append each month. Maybe you would have one option that would delete what was in the data source and refresh from the fresh data source. There's different ways of going about and doing that. Some of the other data sources that we have, there's HTML document, very similar as far as what it looks like. There's limitations as to what can be imported in that. You have XML files or text files. With a text file, an example of that. You get a few other prompts. There's two choices in the way to do that. You can go delimited, which means that there's some type of character that separates one column from the other column, or some types of text fields are a fixed width, in which case each of the columns is a fixed number of characters wide, like 10 or 100, or and then there'll be different ones for each one. Most of the text types tend to be delimited unless you're coming from a much older system, or maybe from the federal government. And then once you select the delimited option, you can, and it does show you here, what's going on. If tab is usually selected by default, if yours does not have a tab in between, then check another, like a space, and you can have more than one done. But notice that this changes. In this particular case, we did not want space, because if you had a space, then red and hot and chili and chocolate would each be in its own column, but that might apply in others. Or a comma, if it's a comma delimited file, is another common one. I've also seen where you would use other and use something like a pipe, for example. You kind of have to get off of that before you can see. Oops, I thought I put a pipe in there. Can't I see that? Anyway, a pipe character is a common one to use. And then, of course, your first row contains field names. And in the case of importing text, that is not something that is by default checked. And then also you have the option of having text qualifiers. Sometimes your fields are enclosed, for example, in double quotes or single quotes, but you don't want those values to come into your data, and then you would use a text qualifier. This one didn't have one, so we're pulling none. And then you can do the same kind of thing, where you have all the different fields that you can highlight, or columns you can highlight one at a time and then change the information up here. You can also, with the text wizard and some of the others, go into this advanced button. And I like this because you get everything on one screen. If you've used other types of import export, like for instance SSIS, you will be more used to an interface that's more like the advanced tab. and you can quickly go in and make changes here, changing the data types or renaming the fields or choosing the options to skip. And we even have a few more options here as far as the formatting goes. Again, you have a save as here, and specs. I gotta be honest, I forget what that is. If anyone's online and they have used the specs for import export specifications, let me know. I just drawn a blank on that one. So yeah, once you save, they'll be listed there. Maybe we can't, in this case I'm going to let it add a primary key, and I'm going to do sales by flavor text just for something. And I'm going to save this one. Here we've got it. You can add a description, you can name it such. You can even create an Outlook task here if you run this frequently and you want a reminder to run it. So with that in mind, there's a lot of other different data sources. If we have more time later, we can go through some more of these. I want to move on here so that we can get through everything. But just to mention them, you can import from databases, from Access, and when you do from Access, you can import other things besides just tables or queries. You can also import forms, reports, modules. So I actually use this frequently to do things like update data or programs for a client. For example, I might, instead of overwriting their entire Access front end, I might make a database that just has the forms that have changed or something in that, and then use the import facility to import the new ones. You can do it from SQL Server, and in SQL Server you can link, or you can import or link to, let me rephrase that. You can import from tables or queries or views, but you can then link to tables. You can't actually link to queries. You have to import the data from those. You can do an Azure database, same like SQL Server, a DBase file. Yeah, we're going to talk about saved imports next, Diane, so I will try to address those questions. You can also do from online services, a SharePoint list, which is quite common, Dynamics 365, Salesforce, or other data services which have been exposed. And you can do it from ODBC databases, which there's quite a variety of ODBC connections that you can create to different types of data sources. So this is actually kind of a wide selection point. Or you can actually do it from Outlook folder. And again, if we have time at the end, I will show you that. But it's kind of nice when you first hit that. Depending upon the size of your Outlook folders, it can take a while to get the interface to pop up. But you can see your contacts, you can see, your mail folders, and you can actually import, from those into an Access table. So it's quite useful in some cases. So going to saved imports. This particular, and I know this interface is a little odd, this particular button, even though it says saved imports, gives you the ability to manage the saved imports and the saved exports. So you can actually save your exports as well. But this is to this question here, Diane. You were asking whether or not you can use your saved import in a macro or VBA. You can do both. You can also run it directly from here. You know, you can select the, and some of the fields here are editable, like, you know, you can edit this, and you could change this to flavors. So some of the pieces are editable, but you notice that we no longer have the whole, there's no edit button down here like there used to be in previous versions. You used to be able to actually go in here and edit and change, you know, your mapping and that kind of thing. But you can't do that anymore. You can edit a few things on here, and you can click the run button directly from here. So this is one UI that you can use. I actually pulled up, ready for you here, a Access user voice posting to, again, allow us to edit the specs of import and export. If that's something that interests you and you missed that, I encourage you to go into user voice and vote for this suggestion. The more votes something gets, the more likely the Access team is to take a look at that. So that's a good option for you. So anyway, you can run, you know, something again. If you need to run it each month, you can run it from here. That's one option. I am going to show some code things here at the end, but I do want to move on before I get to that to quickly to the exporting. For exporting, there's this is not meant to be read this way. It's this direction, or rather here. So there's 8 different options that appear on the standard ribbon here, and saved exports, Excel, text file, XML, email, Access, Word, Merge, PDF, or XPS. And then there's a More button, which will get you to these other formats. So those, again, are all on this Export tab. Saved exports, just like the saved imports. Again, you get to the same interface. It's just 2 different tabs. And then we have export to Excel, text, XML, PDS, or XPS, and email or Access. You notice that Word Merge is not selected in this particular case. It really has to do sometimes, and sometimes when you're flipping back and forth between windows, I think Access gets confused as to where you are. But if you are, for example, in clicked on a table, most of these should be available. If you happen to be clicked on a form, then less of them will be available. You can actually export a form to these formats, although it's not really what you're thinking of, except for in the case of Access, where you can directly export a form as a complete. The way that the form looks is not the data behind the form in these others. So be a little careful of what you're doing, and obviously take a look at what you've done to make sure it's what you really wanted to do. Then we have also under More, as opposed to just a word merge, which the word merge actually starts a mail merge. And if you've done a word mail merge and connected backwards to an Access database, this really looks similar. It essentially brings up a Word instance and starts a mail merge. It's just starting a mail merge from Access as opposed to starting it from Word and then going out and selecting your data source as your Access database. Your data source then is preset in the first steps there. So you can really do the word merge from either direction. But the word export is just into a Word file. And again, most of these look fairly simple, or fairly similar rather. They are some different options on the export whether or not you want to open up the file after it's complete or not. And again, you can name or browse to an existing one if you want. Let me show you the Excel one just so I can make sure I talk through all the options. Oh, you can also export only the selected records or not. So for example, if you have a table open and you happen to have rows selected like this, and you choose export, then you might see this, and again, some of the stuff is not really, in my mind, user friendly and makes much sense. You know, export the data with the formatting, the layout. Why would I ever not want to do that? Sometimes it's checked by default or grayed out, but you know, mess with it a little bit. So if I wanted to, in this case, export the entire products table, I would leave this unchecked. If I only wanted to do these few rows that I have selected, then you would check that. If you didn't have anything selected in here, I think that's the case. I might show one selected. Yeah, then you don't get that option to export only the selected records because you haven't selected some. So it does kind of try to be smart for that. And you can use different file formats in some cases. I believe the text format also gives you, a text file also gives you some different format options. Same with PDF or XPS, you'll be able to choose which of the two formats you want in that. Let's just go ahead and export this. I didn't check the open it up, but if you did check the open it up, then it would open up that file when you were done, and you can save it if you want to. Same thing, create Outlook tasks and save if you want. So this went in, I think, and created a products. And you know, did this export from the table, and it looks pretty nice. You know, it's got your column names and that kind of thing on there, and the various fields that you would have in that table. So it did a pretty good job. Let's see, what else? Then last, I want to go through doing this from code, and notice to kind of answer part of Diane's question here, that I have two sections. Well, I have three really, but two sections here. The do command section. Oops, I'm sorry. What am I doing? Okay, the do command section, which I was trying to highlight, there we go, is typically done from VBA, and then within macros you have several different macro events that you can use to do importing and exporting from macros. So you can basically do the same thing from VBA or from macros, but the name of the command that you use is slightly different. So first thing I want to show you is how to look at and even modify your saved imports from code. I have here in my example a subroutine that one of the Access MVPs wrote years ago, and if you Google the name of this, list saved import exports, and Dirk's name. You can get to this online and copy it in. But basically, it's really nice. If you run this, it's all in debug mode, and you notice it has an optional parameter, which by default is false. It lists out your saved imports and exports. And it doesn't tell you in here whether it's import or export. You would know by the name of it, or perhaps you would name it such. But if you then use the true option, it also lists out for you the XML. And so you can see in the XML several different things, and exactly what you see in the XML specs depends upon your specification. But I have had good luck, even now that we can't technically go in and edit most of the specifications. You can, like I said or showed you, edit the name of the document. But if you wanted to, for example, you had been routinely doing an import and all of a sudden it broke, and you got an answer or a prompt similar to what I did in, I think, the second example, where I had changed the name and I'd taken out the space, and there's needs to be a space in there. You could go in and you could look at what the XML was, excuse me, and then you could modify it through DAO and change the XML, which this XML is just a string. And so you do have to be careful. You have to use, exactly the same format. And, but you could, for example, use a replace command and replace first space quarter with first quarter, and then save that back and, make changes that way. So, you can do that through code and still edit your specifications. But at this time, that's the only way that I know of to get down to the nitty-gritty in actually editing an existing specification. And then the ways to run your commands here well, you can run the saved imports. This is how you run the save import, Diane. And notice it says run saved import export. So if that, and you're calling it by name, if that is an import, you would be importing. If it's an export, you would be exporting. And this one has only one option here. The IntelliSense for this is very good. So if you started here in output 2, it's got the different options that you can use for this. Output 2 is and notice you can actually output reports, etc. on this. Okay, so that's usually used for exporting to an Access database, where that would make sense. Although you saw when I clicked on form that there were other options. You just need to try it first and make sure you're aware of what it's actually outputting in the different cases. But you can do a lot of different things with this. For instance, in Excel, which is pretty common, this is an Excel example above here. We're outputting a table. The table is named the contacts table. This is the format that we want the file to be in. And if you wanted it to be something other than an XLSX format, you could see if you took a look at the object browser. The format. You could see some of the other different formats, you know, that are used and what they mean. XLS means .xls, which is the older format. This is a binary format, etc. You know, we have the text format here, and you can see some of the other formats: HTML, PDF, etc. Anyway, so you can also do other things if you want. Let's see, this is the output format. You can name the file. If you don't name the file, it will prompt you when you run that VBA line to select the file. Auto start, I believe, is a row, and again, you can Google these. The help for these commands are very good at explaining a little bit more about all the different options or parameters here to these routines. But auto start, I think, is where you put like where you're going in the spreadsheet, like which column or which row or something like that, I think. You can do a template file, which I believe is used for things like which worksheet in a workbook, if you want it to go to that, a specific one, an existing one, etc. This one is a little bit different. This is a send command, and so for this one, this is most like used for the email. So if this would be similar to choosing. Sorry, wrong interface here. To choosing export to email. So you could do that from code using this send object. And again, there's you know, the email address, and you could put the subject line, and I just put in here subject and message text. But you know, this would be where the subject line would go and the message text, etc. And then also, besides output to, you can also use the transfer spreadsheet. This has the import or export option. And again, it's very similar to the different formats. And then there's also the link object. Spreadsheet, because I may have been getting confused here with the okay, again, so we've got the spreadsheet type. You can specify the table name, which I've done up here. You can specify the file name, the range, which I believe the range is actually the typically used for either the worksheet, or you can put the worksheet in actually a valid Excel range, and you know, start it at you know, the second row 1, 2 or whatever, instead of 1, 1, which is the default. You'd have to play with that a little bit, and I'm sure there's great examples of exactly, you know, how to do that. But if you didn't want it to go to just the default, which is to create a new worksheet with the table name, then you could specify the range to be, say, an existing worksheet in a workbook, and then it would overwrite that. or append to that if you put a different range. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we've had that I've hopefully answered. The transfer database typically is used to transfer to Access. Again, we've got slightly different commands for the different types of exports available: transfer SharePoint list, transfer SQL database, and transfer text, which would be used to output to a CSV or a text file. And then similarly, you can do the same kinds of things from a macro. If you are in the macro builder, then those will look different. You'll have the email database object, you'll have export with formatting, import with formatting, and you'll have the run saved import export, that's really the only one that's named the same, but your email database object is like the send object, and export with formatting is a way to do most of the transfer type options from a macro. I think that's all I want to say. I've got about 4 minutes left. If anyone has questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, put questions up in the conversation. If there's anything in particular you'd like to see covered that was not covered today, I will also post these links. Again, I will save this PDF and upload it to the, let me see if you've seen that here. On the Access Lunchtime site, there is a blog site, or blog tab, if you will, and so I will add a post after today's meeting that has a link to the PDF of this presentation, so you can click on those links directly from that PDF if you want to go to those. And we will post this video hopefully within the next week, so you could review it again if you missed a particular example. But the main thing I want to say about importing and exporting is, although it has a lot of power, some of the error messages or difficulties you might run into with more complicated data are not always straightforward. So some of them require some trial and error. I've had the most luck with doing things like double checking your column names. It's amazing how an odd character can just make the entire process not work, and taking out a left bracket or something suddenly makes it all work. So that's it. Thank you all for joining us today, and please join us next month when we learn about a nice linked table manager add-in that you can use on the older versions of Access.